the first person that we must mother is ourselves.
Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Boriken podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquest and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmin Hernandez, creator of Cucubanacion, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Boriken. Welcome to another episode of the Rematriating Boriken podcast. If this is your first episode, thank you for being here. And for those of you who have been following over the past year, thank you for your presence again and for your support. I'm super grateful to have people just following along on this experiment. I wanted to share these reflections around motherhood because of the connection to Mother's Day, but these are thoughts that I carry every day as I consider not just my own role as a mother to two adolescent sons, but also just the state of humanity today, right now, the state of the world, the state of our own hearts and spirits with all the changes that we are witnessing. How does the way we ourselves were mothered impact our development and who we are today? How does our relationship to the world and to others speak to how we can be collectively mothered? How can we mother ourselves and give ourselves nurturing today? Some of us are either far away from our mothers or no longer have our mothers on this plane. And so what is that capacity that we all have to mother ourselves and give ourselves that care, that TLC, that nurturing, that love that we are always deserving, regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of whatever? We always have the capacity and should be doing that for ourselves each day. And then last but not least, Rematriating Motherhood for me connects to now at this point, my 11th year in Boriken. What does it mean to live, to have chosen to live in my ancestral homeland, this island of Boriken that I always refer to as my womb, as the collective womb, as the mother? And what does that mean to be mothered by our site of origin, our place of origin? I used to be told in spiritual readings, like in my 20s, that I would step into my power in motherhood. And I used to think it was a crock. Like I never wanted to believe it because I thought it was people trying to lock me into a stereotypical role as woman, as mother. I didn't want to believe that I needed to be a mother to find my power. Knew too many of the narratives of, like, say, Lolita Lebron and how she was thought of as being a bad mother for neglecting her children and, as was said, so-called abandoning her children to go up there, Baldicia Pagan, her son, to go underground and protect him and his identity, and ended up in federal prison for 20 years, and he was sent to Mexico, and just all these stories of what it meant to be Puerto Rican and the need for revolution and the need to parent. all these clashing things, wanting to be a mother, being afraid to be pregnant, to birth, and to mother. Those were all fears of mine. Feeling like I would lose my independence in that process because so much of what I had seen in my upbringing was women who became mothers and wives, and then that became the whole of their identity. And that was concerning to me as an artist and just as a very expressive, present person, passionate, present person in various ways. I knew there was so much more to me than mothering. And so I didn't want to trade all of that. And I was afraid to do all of that. But then reflecting on our history, on the colonial history in Puerto Rico, on imposed experimentation of contraceptives and imposed sterilization, forced sterilization. I also understood that birthing was a radical revolutionary act. Birthing more Puerto Ricans was necessary to our survival. All the while, I am contemplating all these things, not aware that my maternal line of ancestors included midwives and birth workers. And so this spiritually was my call. So this was coming up for me in spiritual readings, but never told who my ancestras were, just that I would step into my power with birthing. When I do become pregnant, following the lines of not wanting my birth to be intervened, not being forced to have a cesarean, and then considering a home birth, or actually wasn't really because of the fears I had around birthing, considering birthing centers, and then being an artist who had no medical coverage, my brother being in the middle of his cancer battle. All of these things then took me through this path where I didn't want to birth in a hospital, and don't realize that what I'm living out is the ancestral memory in my bones that my abuelas, my ancestras, had been birth workers. I was being called to birth in their ancestral tradition, which then connects me to my ancestral wisdom and then opens me to heal in ways that I did not deem myself worthy of until I knew there was another human inside me that merited that protection. And that is when I start to build boundaries and enforce them and care for myself. And that is when I stop existing for the needs and to please others. So those are some of the thoughts. And one of the other thoughts is how you can wage a whole revolution from your home. How, again, feeling and being questioned around people and their activism and how we need so much more, and just wanting to put out how my observations as an artist. And yeah, there are many ways that being a mother has limited me, not because I was a mother, but because societies today are not designed to hold families, hold children. This is a society that still pushes overproductivity and servitude. And in order to be overproductive and to serve, you must be completely available to people at all times. So that does not accommodate the mother who's raising children. That does not accommodate the pregnant person. That does not accommodate the nursing person. That does not accommodate lo que están criando. Telling people like, yo, as you consider the times we are living in, and I understand that previous generations did have to leave their children with parents. The irony now is that I'm raising children at the same time as caretaking for my mother. So I don't really have the option anymore of leaving my children to the care of grandparents. And I don't count on an extended family network here. So it's put my husband and I largely responsible. So when we talk about a tribe and people taking care of children, it has been people who have been able to count on a whole tribe or a village that can share the responsibility of caretaking children or raising children, which we do not have available to us. So the necessity of all of us collectively seeing criar, bringing children into development or guiding children in their development and growth, as equal revolutionary work as any work that you might do on the street. That it should not be normalized to leave children behind to then go do this work elsewhere. That there are various ways to incorporate all of these things, and that all of these things are radical and revolutionary just the same. And so we have to allow ourselves the space and the capacity to accommodate different activisms, different contributions, and different aportaciones to our revolution, so that raising children radically and bringing in the next generation conscious and healed as opposed to traumatized. That process of raising sound, grounded, healed, conscious children is just as revolutionary as any other act you might do out on the street. Possibly more so. Porque de qué vale liberarnos si los que vienen después están todavía colonizados mentalmente.
Let's give gratitude to our own selves for all the generational traumas we'd healed in our own journeys, in our own paths, for all the fears, the insecurities we carry that we push past each day. That part, that inner child that we all have, there is where our essence lies. That child that even in the face of everything, no matter what was happening, had jokes, had smiles, had laughs, the will to play every day. That is who we truly are, that child who dreamed, who saw themselves growing to be something magnificent. That is our authentic essence. Everything beyond that is usually conditioning. We can go back to that child that's inside. Each day, we can make the choice to mother that child, to ensure that we are connected, we are living, we are realizing, we are stepping into all the dreams our child had. That whatever we were told about what we could, what we couldn't do, how we were, how we should be, who we should be, what we should grow up to be, what we should grow up to do, what we should grow up to marry, and whatever other things and conditioning that was put upon us by anyone, whether it be our parents, our teachers, our communities, extended families and friends, social media, TV, the internet, whatever it was. We every day get to mother ourselves back to that authentic essence. We are all born with the creative power to mother. I didn't say to birth, I said to mother. And that process of nurturing and complete unconditional love, to love oneself through our flaws, our fears, our insecurities. And that's what it is to love ourselves in wholeness. That is what it is to mother. Mother is not to watch people and keep them from our own fears and everything we're afraid of, and to teach them to be afraid of the same things we're afraid of. We can all mother. And the first person that we must mother is ourselves. And when I say mother, there's a certain nurturing, there is a certain essence that we all, regardless of our gender, can tap into. In this conversation about rematriating motherhood, it is also a call to each of us to go back to that place of our coming into this lifetime, of our development, to ask the question of what was it that we were needing that we did not get. Be clear with those things so that we know what it is that we must give. Every day that we spend with ourselves should be an opportunity to fill the void, to provide that thing we were missing. Too much of life gets wasted waiting upon someone to come and rescue us. And that's all a myth. That doesn't really happen. It's very unlikely that someone will come into our lives and do that. And it's also very unfair to put that expectation and responsibility on someone else to know what it is that we need and for them to provide it. Let someone come into our lives and love us just in the way that they best know how, and let them give that freely without the responsibility of healing shit that had nothing to do with them from long ago in our past. There's a relationship with ourselves where we know ourselves, where we are intimately connected to our inner child, and where every single day we have the privilege to get to know what those unfulfilled needs are, what they were, what they are, and commit to working on that, to providing that, to healing that. That is how we mother. The conversation of rematriating motherhood is also not a conversation limited to mothers, actual birthing mothers, or mothers by crianza, or women. Because we were all born. Considering what motherhood means, what it should mean. Because it's a triggering thing for some. Not everybody had a mother that they could connect to. And not everybody had a mother that made them feel safe. When I think of motherhood and my ideal of what motherhood should be, it is the place that we return to feel safe. So rematriating motherhood is interesting because it's almost redundant for me, because motherhood and this mother, the womb, the homeland, are synonymous for me in many ways. There are many ways in which I was loved by this place that I liken to being that divine mother energy, that goddess mother energy that some of us connect to in whatever ways, whether it be the water, fertility, goddess energies right here in this archipelago of Atave, of the Orisha Yemaya, connecting to the salt waters, whereas Atave is known for her sweet waters, her fresh waters. Mami Wata, and so many energies that our humanity has held dear over time. The interconnectivity of our bodies, the oneness of the female body with the earth body. The last episode, I talked about rematriate your body. I talked about earth as a stand-in for the body. The body is microcosm for earth. All right, so it's no wonder that in our wombs, or us being held in our mother's wombs, we floated in salt water. Amniotic waters are salt waters, like our seas, like the seas of this earth, the oceans of this earth. But it's not just female cis bodies, it is all bodies. We sweat salt water, we cry saltwater tears. Salt is a mineral that is found throughout our bodies, like the earth. So this idea of what it means to mother, what it means to be of the essence, what it means to be cradled in the womb of your origins, your source. Again, root chakra concepts, lo que es la fuente, la tribu, la tierra. Root, tribe, homeland, ancestors, body, these things, sanctuary, home, safety, security. What did mothering and motherhood become under colonialism? At some point, mothering stopped being about loving our child. Not that that ever stops. Biologically, our hormones make that happen. And if there isn't too much of a disruption of that process, that is what will usually happen. But my point being that colonialism was a disruption in the natural order of our people, of our families, of nurturing and loving and mothering. At some point, mothering became protecting, imposing a very aggressive energy over ourselves and our babies. The energy of fighting, the energy of preparing your babies to fight. Like if we were fucking bear cubs. How many of us grew up in the hood? And part of mothering was teaching your kids how to defend themselves and fight outside the home. Is that really a natural part of mothering? All the conditioning of little girls to keep our legs closed, to not wear skirts that are too short or too this or too that. All of these things, are they mothering? Are they flowing with the energy of love? Or are they teaching, conditioning, imposing a way that is responsive, that is responding, that is reacting to the patriarchy, to white supremacy, to the violence of these two structures? Somewhere along the way, mothering was less about loving and became more about fighting to keep our babies safe, teaching our babies to fight. And then in disciplining, the yelling, the bringing fear as a parenting element, the belief that to cause your child to fear you means that they respect you. But where there is fear, love can't flow freely there. So how do you hold both things? And then so many of us grow up in resentment, and so many children walk around resenting their inability to be their free selves, which is what they have always been through childhood. Rematriating Motherhood asks us to consider what was mothering in a peaceful society. What is motherhood liberated? What are babies liberated? What is birthing in freedom versus captivity? This is something I try to capture with my home births. What if not every physical process of my body was a pathology or treated like one? What if I, like a loba, had full dominion over my own birth space? And if I birthed at home, then I could control everything that happened in that space and ensure that I was inserted and my body was cradled in a space that felt safe for me and my baby, my family. And you bring in the midwife as expert, as the person who carries millennia of ancestral wisdom. It is so urgent to call back the feminine wisdom, the matriarchal wisdom that connects us back to the essence. The mother is the essence. The mother is source. The mother is life. The mother is abundance. The mother is freedom. The mother is safety. The mother is security. The mother is life. It's nurturing. It's growing. It's loving. It's laughing. It's joy. Rematriating motherhood is a double assertion of this need to return to our feminine wisdom. The need to recapture the matriarchal. The need to recapture that which centers life and living. The need to recapture the womb as homeland, as mother, as source, as life. Recapture these and bring them back and dismantle a system that keeps everything centered that has to do with capital, with structures that are man-made, and if they're man-made, they can be unmade by man. Whereas the mother is persistent, is natural, has been here since before the destruction, and after the destruction will persist because the source is divine. That is why all these structures they build, that is why all these effing apagones, so that we can see that all these things that they steal money for and take money for and make you pay for aren't long lasting. They're flawed. And all the while, they're capitalist ways. And I'm talking from way before technology, because their capitalist ways or were created enslavement all along their capitalist ways, worked to make us forget our divinity, our magic, and our power. And that is how slavery continues to this day. The motherless children. I talked in the last episode of Rematriate Your Body, this idea of the Black spiritual, the motherless child, a long way from home. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. And to feel like a motherless child, abandoned, alone, a long way from home, is to have that child dispossessed and disempowered. And that has been the aim of the patriarchy. That we all exist, that we all show up like motherless children. Hay un dicho aquí en Puerto Rico where if someone acts a fool, people will be like, no tienen mama. No tienen mama. The Rematriate Collective, a group of indigenous Haudenosaunee women, which those nations, the Confederacy of Indigenous Nations that are mostly spread through upstate New York and into Canada, because we know that they split our nations with their imposed colonial borders so that what is, for example, the Akwesasne Reservation today, or this Mohawk Reservation, Mohawk being one of the Haudenosaunee nations, running through that reservation is the U.S.-Canadian border. The Rematriate Collective call Rematriation returning the sacred to the mother. I need to pause with that because we need to process what that means for us. See, in the conversation of Puerto Rico, when I first looked up rematriation as a term and said this term, this is it, this is the answer, the womb, I birthed at home, the first thing that came up for me was the Rematriate Collective. Nothing on Puerto Rico. This was just but a few years ago. Today, Puerto Rico has this whole hashtag thing going on with Rematriate. And my question to the collective is, what does that mean to you? My question to individuals is, what does that mean to you? So to say that this group of indigenous women, Haudenosaunee women, that has now since expanded to indigenous peoples all over Turtle Island and beyond, and they call rematriation returning the sacred to the mother. So speaking to everyone, but in particular to Boricuas, and in particular to those using a hashtag of rematriation as pertaining, as it connects to Puerto Rico, as it connects to this island of Boriken, as it connects to the island of Vieques. What does that mean? Because when we talk about rematriation in a mass way, we seem to be talking about a move, but it's not a move. A move is a move. A move is you take all your stuff, you pack it, and you move it elsewhere. That's a move. And then you take your body and you move it elsewhere. But it's not that simple. In the same way that there are many Africans of the diaspora, Afro descendants of this vast diaspora, of this largest continent of ours on this earth. There are many people displaced and dispossessed through enslavement that cannot map exactly their origins. What is their source, their land? Last year, this time, Melanie Maldonado Diaz, and we did a podcast episode around it, podcast episode 8. She organized an event in La Playa de Ponce, honoring a group of enslaved Africans, captives that were brought to Boriken and were left at the dock at the Puerto de Ponce in 1818. 8 of them disembarked. Melanie invited me to participate in that event, even though I was like, I'm not worthy, because it was just such a powerful ancestral event. And she invited me to represent as an hija, as a nieta de Playa de Ponce. But because I have not lived ever in Ponce, I was shy to go there as a representative. My grandmother and my mother were born in Playa de Ponce. Melanie collaborated with Playa de Ponce artists who I know from El Barrio East Harlem, Diogenes Ballester. In fact, Ballester is a variation of my own grandmother's last name. My grandmother's last name is Ballester, with a more French spelling, T-I-E-R at the end. Melanie had asked Diogenes if he could do me the favor, because Melanie had worked on my genealogy and she knew that my abuela was born there in that community, and she knew where my abuelas were born. And these abuelas in this lineage of mine worked as parteras. Not that my abuela specifically was a partera, but that lineage. This was a wisdom already held by the women of the family, so that my tia Aide, who lived next door to us in East New York, Brooklyn, had a lot of this knowledge. And as a teen would help assist with births in Ponce. Melanie had asked Diogenes if he would do me the favor of locating the sites that she was able to identify by going through the records of the census and other things to know where my abuela, my bisabuela, my tatarabuela lived. And he did that and took me on this magnificent tour that was, to me, the greatest dream that I never had even asked for. And that's when you know there are dreams that we dream, and then there's shit that your ancestors are like, you think you need this, but I'm gonna give you that. And a lot of times we resist that thing that they give us, thinking that we know better. And what we need is the humility to receive the invaluable gifts that are coming for us, versus chasing the shit and the conditioning, the commodities that they condition us to salivate over, that don't even serve us, that don't even resonate with us. Well, one of those communities I described to him the way it was described by my tia, who had visited as a child, and I described what this community was, and it was on the water, and there's a limited stretch of waterfront, especially why? Because of La Guancha, because so much of our waterfronts are taken. He's like, oh, sí, yo sé cuál barrio. And when he leads us there, and I follow him in our car, I follow their car with my car and arrive, and he stops at this humongous parking lot. And in this humongous parking lot, hay dos grúas enormes. Like those big, when I was little in Brooklyn, in Red Hook, I used to call those giants chairs. In my child eyes, they looked like humongous chairs that giants would sit on. And those were actually the gruas. I don't even know how to say that shit in Spanish. Like certain words just disappear from your mind. I don't know. Grúa. Grúa, the lifts, the whatever that they have on the docks. If you're from Brooklyn, you know, look por ahí por Red Hook, no sé si todavía las tienen. O aquí en Ponce, todos saben esas dos grúas that Diogenes later explained about these grúas, and they are there next to El Puerto de Ponce, the port of Ponce, and they are there to lift, the containers off ships. And to one side están la grúa y al otro lado están todos los carros y chain link fence para el lado de acá y chain link fence para el lado de allá. Y al otro lado de la cerca esa of the fence is the sea that my tia had described my grandmother's home was built over, that their homes were built on stilts practically over the water. Y no habían acera, habían tablitas que se caminaban. Pues todo esto para decir that when I was led to my homeland, or where my abuelas lived, And quite possibly my mom might have been born there. It is very possible that that was the home my mother was born, but when I got there, it was under asphalt and concrete and chain link fencing and barbed wire. And it was a parking lot. So we got to be careful not to twist and romanticize this notion of rematriation. Because for too many of us, our homelands don't exist. For too many Viequenses, their birthplace or the birthplace of their parents or grandparents and beyond may be sitting on a crater of some U.S. Navy bomb. For too many of us, we can't go back to lands contaminated, bombed out. All of Gaza today is the most painful state of rematriation, watching all of those folks marching back to their lands, to their homes, as pulverized concrete and rock, and watching these people cry as they walk to their home. That's rematriation. And they only lasted there in the rubble a matter of days or weeks before they got bombed out again. That is why we cannot talk about rematriation without talking about genocide. That is why we cannot talk about rematriation without talking about conquest and colonialism, because without these things, there would be no need to rematriate. Rematriation, to break down the etymology of it, to return to la madre, to the womb, means that we were ripped out of the womb. It was a violent process that ripped us out of this womb. Like they snipped the fallopian tubes of so many of our mothers' bellies, sterilizing them as they did with indigenous women of Turtle Island, as they did with African American women, and as they did recently with migrant women in U.S. detention centers. They decide whether we are fit to reproduce. In honor of the mother, the source, we gather all sacred things, taken, stolen, ourselves included, and we return to her. This is me taking liberties of interpreting the Rematriate collectives. Lema, reflecting on what it means to be of a culture, of a people that have been subjected to various forms of genocide. When we think about the conquest and we think about our indigenous ancestors and all of those mujeres who were violated, all of those men that came as conquistadores, that came in war, that had spent all these weeks at sea and possibly months at sea and arrived here, we think of the violations that happened. We think of how many of our indigenous ancestors were wiped out as a result of diseases that they had no immunities to. And we think of that easily as a genocide. What I find very perplexing today is how few of us are allowed, are given license to speak of Palestine and what is happening in Gaza as a genocide. It is the most blatant act of genocide imaginable, and yet we are silenced. We are silenced and punished and persecuted for speaking this truth that doesn't really require much convincing, because it's probably the first time that genocide has been carried out right before our eyes, or right before on the global stage, via this thing called the internet, via this thing called social media. Everything is happening in real time. The people suffering what's happening are posting it to their social media profiles for us to see it like we were there. Now, there's nothing that could ever compare to what it is to be there. My point being that this isn't something we're reading about in history books that happened centuries ago, where we say often that the history was written in the perspective of those who wrote it. How ironic that we all have access to this information today. We have access to the videos, to the news reports, to the photos, to the images, to the death tolls, to who is being killed. They keep calling this a war, and I have yet to see Palestinian soldiers armed and fighting with their weapons. Every time I see a video or an image of Palestinians, many of them happen to be women and children. And that is not to say that there aren't women combatants, because there have been and there will continue to be, especially if this continues in this way. But my point being that we today are being denied the right to call what we see with our own eyes a genocide. I make this point because when it comes to Puerto Rico, people may think that, y'all don't have it as bad. And that the genocide that happened to Puerto Rico was, with the arrival of the conquistadores and the conquest back 500 years ago. And the reason why I still think of us as people surviving genocide is that, number one, this did happen. This did happen to our ancestors. And where there were thousands upon thousands of people who died, who lost their lives, we are still here today. And that is nothing short of a miracle. And that is something that we need to walk with, always knowing. Genocide is what we saw with the enslavement of Africans, the treatment, the harsh conditions, which is exactly what the hell slavery is supposed to be, and the number of lives that were lost in slavery, the number of birthing women lost, the number of babies born, stillborn, not born at all, miscarried, infant mortality, the death of children to hunger, the women taken away from their children. These are other forms of genocide that endure. And genocide endured through the 20th century with the experimentation on the wombs of Puerto Rican women, the experimentation of contraceptives, the ones that U.S. women speak to giving them so much of their liberation, were experimented on Puerto Rican women, and also African American women, Native American women. And what we all have in common as colonized women of the U.S. empire, Boricua women, African American women, Native American women, first and foremost, dispossessed of their ancestral lands, is we were all sterilized. I say we because it's as recent as my mother. We, as in each of these nations of women who were systemically sterilized. So at the height of this campaign among Boricua women, over 1/3 of women of childbearing age had been sterilized. And so that continues to be genocide. And so the irony is, if they won't even let us talk about Gaza as a genocide, what person is going to claim these secret tubal ligations, these secret hysterectomies performed on women, oftentimes without their own knowledge? I just saw something the other day about African American women who would go into the hospital for one procedure and would come out not knowing that they had been sterilized while in there without their consent. The way that empire has been waged over our bodies. Coming upon the term rematriation and saying, I am ready. I have found the rightful name for my journey. Rematriation. This is everything. I'm a woman who birthed at home. I am the descendant of women who were birth workers. I've said always that in coming back, I came back to the womb. I came back to the womb to heal myself, to heal my own womb, to heal my lineage, and to heal that lineage moving forward in subsequent generations. We must consider what that means to us. What does rematriation mean for us with this very unique archipelagic existence where we live out in a diaspora, born or raised out in a diaspora, across borders, across lands, in our island homes. Our home is an archipelago made up of different islands, and it is far away. And we are people of the water, and our people navigated waters, salt waters. We're people of el huracán. The word itself of hurricane is an indigenous word to our language, to the Arawak that our ancestors spoke. What does rematriation mean for us? And we got to go down to the basics, the layers that have been buried under bombs, under their craters and their contaminants and their chemicals, under their asphalt, their concrete, their parking lots, their ports, their shopping malls, their military bases. What is the essence when we uncover? We speak of Atave, and we connect Atave to Oshun, the sweet waters. And I had this meditation this morning about the rivers and the fact that in the past week, so many rivers across Boriken have come, of course. We have seen some of the worst flooding. Some of the folks say that it's been decades since they've seen some of the flooding that has been seen in the last days. And this morning in meditation, I just had this sense that Boriken needed this cleanse, this purge. And I started to see all these banks covered with these river waters and all these nutrients and minerals deposited. And I saw like this future springing as we think of more and more scarcity and how much Puerto Rico relies on the U.S. for the importing of most of what it consumes, and how the U.S. and all these tariffs, things are looking more and more bleak and grim. And then I saw all this stuff growing that hadn't grown in the ways that it had before in so long. And I saw the floods, which I am not trying to romanticize because they were horrific, because people were displaced and affected. But it was a vision that showed them to me as a spiritual cleansing. Driving to Mayagüez today, coming down the hills of Añasco, I could see the blue sea waters painted brown along the coast, la descarga de los ríos, the deposits of these rivers just pushing all their silt, all their clay, their red clay, off from the mountaintops. Those mountaintops covered with marine fossils. Those mountaintops once were underwater, and it is this continuous dance, this continuous relationship between those montes and all that they release through their rivers back to the sea. Are the montes returning the sacred to the mother? Are the montes pushing out all this pain, all this rage, and just says, flood this, take it away, afuera. And then when this happens, they're like cultures of people who live by the river, that they live this as part of their existence, and they know the ways to get the tools that are going to best clean the mud out of their house. And they live there in symbiosis, knowing that this possibility exists. And at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, you have neighbors in each other's homes helping each other clean. And they toss what needs to be tossed. And as you saw people on the news, what you kept hearing was the message, bueno, la cosa está bien, que yo tengo que botar cosas, porque lo más importante y lo que yo tengo es la vida. And that is why the original stewards are the ones we most need to listen to, the ones we can most know from and learn from, the ones who have lived in harmony with the river, with the seas, with the monte, with these earths, with these waters, with these winds. To talk about rematriating motherhood and rematriating the mother is to talk about not just the kind of house you want to be in, not how you transport your car on some container to whatever port. It is how you and your body are sacred, and you return yourself to this mother. And when you do, what is the relationship that you engage in? Motherhood for Boricuas is so many levels. Beyond pregnancy, beyond birthing, beyond raising babies, it is the essence of our existence. It is the renegade abuelas y parteras who delivered these babies from plantations, from colonialism, and ensured that they could be born, that they could live, that they could grow well and strong, and that their mothers would live through the births. And it is the reason why we are here today. And what if we walked every day in rematriation? What if every day rematriating motherhood meant that we commit to mother ourselves? Mothering ourselves is the equivalent of healing ourselves, the equivalent of decolonizing ourselves, the equivalent of liberating ourselves and the collective. You can tune into future episodes every new and full moon when I post them. And for more information about the project Rematriating Boriken, you can visit rematriatingboriken.com. That's rematriating with an M, and Boriken with K-E-N. And Rematriating Boriken is also on Instagram and Facebook. So you can follow us there. If you like this, please give a like and a share. If you want updates for future posts, subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And thank you again so much for listening. In light always. This is Yasmin.